In this vast, restless world, as the night softly wraps its arms around you, I invite you to pause. Take a deep breath. Let go of the burdens you carried today. For a little while, there is no rush, no noise, no expectations. Tonight, you are safe. Tonight, you are heard. Tonight, we journey together, not to chase dreams of glory, but to whisper forgotten truths into the quiet corners of the night. May your heart be light tonight. May your mind find stillness. May your soul feel less alone in this ever-turning world. As you listen, remember, history is not always made by heroes. Sometimes it is shaped by hands too cruel to be remembered with honor. Sometimes the stories we carry are heavy, not because we admire them, but because we must learn from them. So tonight, with kindness in my voice and warmth in my heart, I offer you stories, not of greatness, but of warning, not of courage, but of caution. We will travel through the dusty corridors of forgotten palaces. We will stand beneath the crumbling thrones of kings who wore crowns of cruelty. We will see how power, when held without compassion, leaves nothing but silence and sorrow behind. May these stories be a gentle guide to you, a reminder that even in darkness, wisdom can still be found, that even the worst chapters of history carry lessons that light our way forward. You and I, we are not just drifting through empty time tonight. We are walking through the echoes of the past, hand in hand, listening, feeling, remembering, as you close your eyes and drift into the soft embrace of sleep. Let these whispers of old warn your soul softly and bless your heart with understanding. May peace find you tonight. May peace stay with you always. Now, come closer, settle your thoughts, and let me tell you about the kings who ruled not with love, but with fear. The kings whose names became curses rather than songs. The rulers whose mistakes remind us that no throne stands forever, and no cruelty lives untouched by time. Our journey begins in the shadows of history, where the worst kings once walked, in a time not so long ago, across oceans and lands bathed in misty sunlight. There lived a king who wore a crown stained with the sorrow of millions. His name was Leopold II, King of the Belgians, a man born into luxury, draped in the silks of royalty, praised by the world for his polite charm and grand ambitions. But behind the golden mask, there lived a hunger, deep, hollow, and unrelenting, for more land, more wealth, more power. Leopold did not dream, as kings often do, of bettering the lives of his people or carving his name into the stones of honor. No, his dreams were darker. He dreamed of conquest without armies, riches without labor, and a kingdom that would grow fat on the suffering of others. Far from his gilded palace in Belgium, there lay a land of endless green, the Congo, a place of forests so dense that sunlight barely touched the ground, rivers that sang songs older than memory itself, people who lived close to the earth, carrying with them ancient traditions, simple joys, and deep wisdom. To Leopold, the Congo was not a living place. It was a treasure chest, and he was determined to pry it open, no matter how many lives it would cost. With clever words and deceitful treaties, he claimed the Congo not for Belgium, but for himself, a personal empire the size of Western Europe, hidden from the eyes of the world. He called it the Congo Free State, but there was no freedom there. Under the king's invisible hand, villages were torn apart, families were broken like dry twigs, men were forced to bleed the land dry, harvesting ivory, tapping rubber, their sweat and their lives, feeding Leopold's insatiable greed. The trees of the Congo became grave markers. The rivers turned dark with sorrow. Every quota not met was answered with cruelty too painful to fully name. Hands were severed, homes were burned, children were stolen away. Hope was crushed under the heavy boots of foreign soldiers, loyal not to law or humanity, but only to profit. In Belgium, Leopold was hailed as a great monarch, a builder of monuments, a patron of the arts. He strolled through grand halls, receiving applause and admiration, while across the sea, an entire people wept in silence. The Congo became a wound that bled unseen, an open scar on the earth, invisible to the polished mirrors of Europe. Yet even silence has a limit. Even buried truths find a way to breathe. In time, brave souls began to speak. Missionaries, travelers, and quiet witnesses who refused to look away. Their whispered reports grew louder, gathering weight and outrage, until the world could no longer pretend not to hear. Under mounting pressure, Leopold was forced to surrender his private kingdom, but the damage had been done. It is said that 10 million souls, men, women, and children, vanished into the hunger he unleashed, a number so vast it defies the mind, so heavy it crushes the heart. Leopold lived the rest of his days surrounded by luxury, rarely acknowledging the empire of suffering he had created. And when he died, his funeral procession was jeered by crowds. No songs were sung for him, no tears were shed. Only the silent ghosts of the Congo bore witness to the final fall of a king whose name became a curse. Tonight, as you drift closer to sleep, may you remember that history, though shaped by power, belongs truly to those who endure it. That every crown, no matter how bright, grows dim without compassion, and that the echoes of cruelty, though ancient, still ripple through the quiet corners of the night. May your dreams be lighter than the shadows we have touched. May your heart carry only the weight of wisdom, and none of the sorrow left behind. Now, rest. Let the night carry you gently forward, far from the footsteps of kings like Leopold, whose reign ended not in glory, but in grief, far away from the polished marble floors of Leopold's palaces. The lives of the Congolese people unfolded in endless suffering. Villages that once buzzed with laughter fell silent. Farms that once fed generations were abandoned, swallowed by the creeping jungle. Mothers clutched empty arms where children once played. Men, broken by endless labor and endless loss, stumbled through the ruins of their lives. The Congo Free State was a land of unseen horror, hidden behind carefully crafted lies. Leopold, ever the master of appearances, spun tales of civilization and progress to the world beyond. He spoke of hospitals, schools, and roads, painting an image of benevolence so convincing that even the most skeptical voices hesitated. But behind the veil, there were no hospitals that healed, no schools that taught, no roads that led anywhere, but deeper into despair. Instead, there were brutal overseers who carried out Leopold's silent orders. Companies set impossible quotas, and the force publique, a private army of mercenaries, enforced them with terror. They wielded whips made from hippopotamus hide, fired rifles without remorse, and severed hands as proof of punishment. It was not enough to simply extract the riches of the land. The king demanded evidence of obedience, proof that no bullet was wasted, no mercy given. And so, in dark forests and lonely clearings, hands were cut from the living and the dead alike. Tiny, delicate hands of children who could not carry the weight of rubber or the burden of impossible demands. Hands presented like trophies to officers who counted them with the coldness of accountants tallying profits. This was the legacy of Leopold, a kingdom measured not in acres, but in amputations, not in prosperity, but in pain. And still, in Belgium, monuments rose, grand buildings, sweeping parks, glorious fountains, funded by blood never seen by the builders, whose hands remained clean, whose hearts remained untouched. Leopold became a symbol of national pride, while in the Congo, an entire generation grew up under the shadow of terror. Their memories etched with scars no time could ever erase. There are stories still whispered today by descendants of the survivors. Stories of families forced to flee into the depths of the forest, living like hunted animals to escape the king's collectors. Of villages that chose death over surrender, setting fires to their own homes rather than see their children taken away. Of brave souls who fought back with whatever weapons they could find, stones, spears, courage, and who fell silently, their names lost to the winds of time. And yet, for all his cruelty, Leopold believed himself untouchable. He moved through the royal courts of Europe with ease, hiding the stench of his crimes beneath perfumes of diplomacy and gold-embroidered lies. It took decades for the truth to crack the polished surface of his image. Men like E.D. Morel, Roger Casement, and missionaries who could no longer bear the weight of their silence began to gather proof. Letters, photographs, eyewitness testimonies so haunting that even the comfortable leaders of distant lands were forced to listen. A storm of outrage built slowly, like distant thunder rolling closer, and finally, facing global condemnation, Leopold was forced to relinquish his personal hold over the Congo. The Belgian government took control, and with it, the promise, empty though it often was, of some slight improvement. But for those who had suffered, the king's departure brought little relief, for wounds carved so deeply into the soul of a people cannot be erased by the signing of a paper. Leopold lived out his remaining years in luxury, seldom speaking of the Congo. He built extravagant homes, surrounded himself with young companions, and demanded respect even as whispers of his true legacy grew louder. When he died in 1909, it was not to the mourning of a grateful nation, but to the muted cheers of those who could no longer stomach the mask he had worn for so long. His funeral procession, intended to be a display of royal dignity, was instead a gauntlet of jeers and angry faces. The marble statues he left behind still stand in places across Belgium, monuments to a man whose hands were soaked not in ceremonial oils, but in the blood of innocence. Tonight, as you listen, as you drift farther from the world of noise and closer to the world of dreams, remember this: that power built on suffering is fragile. That cruelty, no matter how carefully hidden, stains everything it touches. And that history does not forget, even when kings do. May your heart be stronger than greed. May your spirit rise higher than cruelty. And may the lessons of sorrow weave themselves quietly into the fabric of your dreams. Where no tyrant's hand can ever reach, the night is still. The world outside your window sleeps, and we, together, turn the page to another chapter, another whisper from the past. Far across the seas, the Congo wept for the lives it could never reclaim. The forests that once whispered songs of life now stood as silent witnesses to suffering. The rivers that once carried laughter now bore the weight of sorrow in their steady flow. But even in the darkest corners of history, there flicker small lights, lights of resilience, lights of memory. The Congolese people, despite all they had endured, found ways to survive, to rebuild shattered villages, to sing songs again under starlit skies, to pass down stories from one generation to the next. Stories that refused to let the pain be forgotten, but also refused to let the pain define them. It is said that some of the oldest trees in the Congo still carry the marks of the chains once wrapped around them, marks not visible to the eye, but felt by those who listen closely enough. The land remembers, the rivers remember, the people remember, and though Leopold tried to erase the evidence of his cruelty with grand gestures and marble monuments, the truth grew roots deeper than any stone he could lay. Today, historians and scholars piece together the shattered records. They read the letters smuggled out by missionaries who risked their lives to tell the world. They study the worn photographs taken at great peril, showing children with missing hands, mothers with empty eyes, villages burned to ash. The numbers stagger the imagination. Millions of lives lost, some to violence, some to starvation, some simply to the slow erosion of hope. But beyond numbers, there are faces, faces of those who lived and loved, whose dreams were stolen before they could even be spoken. Faces not captured in portraits hung in palaces, but faces remembered in songs, in prayers, in the very earth itself. Leopold II, for all his titles and ceremonies, could never silence those faces. He could not smother their whispers. He could not wash away the blood that seeped into the soil of the Congo Free State. As he sat upon his throne, counting his riches and admiring his marble halls, the cries of the Congo seeped through the cracks of his carefully constructed world. Perhaps he heard them in the quiet hours of the night. Perhaps he shut them out with grander spectacles and louder music. But history heard them, and history, patient and unyielding, carried them forward. Long after the king's gold has dulled and his statues have gathered dust, the truth shines sharper than any crown. It whispers to those who listen, beware the hunger for power that sees human lives as mere stepping stones. Beware the lies woven in silk and gold. Beware the kings who smile with empty hearts. Tonight, as you lie still, let these gentle lessons weave themselves into your dreams. Let them settle in your heart like seeds of kindness planted deep where no cruelty can reach. Remember that the truest measure of a ruler of any soul is not how grand their palaces are, nor how many lands they claim, but how they treat the smallest, the quietest, the most forgotten among them. May your heart always choose kindness over conquest. May your spirit always protect those who cannot protect themselves. And may you, even in your quiet dreams, walk lighter upon this earth than kings like Leopold ever did. The night stretches long and peaceful before you now. The stars wheel slowly across the velvet sky, indifferent to the crowns and empires that rise and fall beneath them. Listen closely. You might still hear it, the soft breathing of forests growing back where sorrow once reigned, the gentle hum of rivers healing their broken songs, the steadfast heartbeat of a people who endured. There is more to our journey still, more shadows to step through, more lessons to gather. But for now, rest. Let the memory of Leopold II fade like mist before the dawn. Let the sorrow he caused sink beneath the weight of your compassion, and let your dreams be filled not with kings, but with hopes stronger than any throne. And yet, the story of Leopold is not just a story of cruelty. It is a story of how easy it is to hide injustice behind grand ideas, how simple it is to cloak greed in the language of progress, how even the worst of actions can wear a smiling mask for a time. Leopold spoke of bringing civilization to the Congo. He promised to end slavery, to build schools, to lift people from what he claimed was darkness. But his version of civilization was a colder darkness still, a darkness not born from ignorance, but from deliberate, careful cruelty. He convinced leaders around the world that he was a great humanitarian. He made speeches full of noble words, filled papers with grand announcements, and posed in portraits as a benefactor of the African people. And for years, most of the world believed him. They looked at the surface, the treaties signed, the flags raised, the reports carefully polished by his agents, and saw what they wanted to see. Meanwhile, in the dense forests of the Congo, the truth grew like a shadow. It grew in the empty huts left after forced labor raids. It grew in the sunken faces of starving children. It grew in the silent prayers of mothers who buried their sons before they had ever truly lived. It grew and grew and grew until even the thick walls of palaces could no longer keep it out. Leopold's own agents eventually became uneasy. Those sent to oversee the collection of rubber and ivory reported horrors they could not bear to describe. Some resigned, some stayed silent, some chose to speak. One by one, voices rose against him, quiet at first, then stronger, like the gathering rumble of an approaching storm. It was not easy to fight the lies. It took years of patient work. Brave souls like E.D. Morel, who uncovered suspicious patterns in the shipping records. He noticed that ships leaving Belgium for the Congo were full of weapons and chains, and that the ships returning were full of rubber and ivory, but carried no goods of trade. There was no commerce, only extraction, only bleeding. Roger Casement, a British diplomat, traveled deep into the Congo and documented what he saw. His reports were damning, filled with first-hand accounts of villages wiped out, of men whipped to death, of women held hostage to force their husbands to labor harder. The world could no longer look away. Public outrage grew, meetings were held, petitions were signed. Newspapers ran horrifying stories of Congo atrocities, stirring the hearts of distant readers who had once clapped for Leopold's empty promises. And though the king fought desperately to maintain his grip, bribing journalists and intimidating critics, the tide had turned. Under mounting pressure, Leopold was forced to relinquish the Congo Free State in 1908. It was handed over to the Belgian government, becoming a colony, still wounded, still exploited in new ways, but at least no longer the private property of one man. Leopold received enormous compensation for surrendering his bloody jewel. He used the money to build more monuments to himself, to line the avenues of Belgium with statues that bore his face, to commission fountains and parks that celebrated a greatness he never truly earned. He lived his final days in bitterness, isolated, aging, angry at the world that had dared to question him. When he died, only a handful of loyalists mourned him. The crowds, who once politely applauded his parades, now booed his funeral. Flowers thrown into the streets became weapons of protest, not offerings of love. There was no outpouring of grief, no golden legacy, only the heavy, silent reckoning of a life spent building monuments on the bones of the innocent. The Congo itself continued to suffer under colonial rule for decades after. Freedom would not come quickly. The scars Leopold left were too deep, too wide, too raw to heal easily. But still, through it all, the people endured. They rebuilt villages. They sang songs that remembered what was lost, but also what could never be taken: dignity, hope, humanity. They carried their history forward, whispering it from parent to child, so that it would not be forgotten, so that it would never happen again without a voice rising in warning. Even today, when we walk through certain parks in Belgium and see Leopold's statues, we are reminded of the heavy silence that monuments can carry. Silent not because they tell no story, but because they hide so much beneath their stone faces. Every time the story of Leopold is told, it is an act of remembering, an act of honoring those who had no voice, whose pain was once hidden behind walls of lies. Tonight, as you drift closer to sleep, may you remember not just the kings and empires that once ruled the earth, but the quiet souls who lived beneath their rule, the mothers who sang lullabies, even as the world crumbled around them, the fathers who taught their sons how to hope, even when hope itself seemed lost, the children who dreamed of laughter in a world that had stolen their songs. History often celebrates the grand, the powerful, the loud, but true history, real history, belongs to the unseen, to the whispered stories told around fires, to the secret prayers said before sleep, to the stubborn, unbreakable spirit of people who refuse to be erased. May your heart tonight be full of compassion for those forgotten by the pages of official history. May your dreams be gentle. May your spirit find peace in the knowledge that cruelty, no matter how vast, can never fully extinguish kindness. Leopold's empire has fallen. His monuments gather dust, but the stories of those he tried to silence live on, stronger, braver, more enduring than any crown. Rest now, Let the stars wheel above you, indifferent to kings and empires, faithful only to time itself. Let the rivers of your dreams carry you to gentler shores, where history's wounds are met with healing, where sorrow is wrapped in the softest cloth of memory, and where even the worst of kings become nothing more than a lesson passed carefully, lovingly, from one dreamer to the next. Sleep well, traveler, sleep in peace. Long ago, under the vast and ancient skies of a world still finding its shape, there rose an empire that touched the very edges of civilization. Rome, mighty, magnificent, sprawling across the known world like a tapestry woven from blood and ambition. And within that mighty empire, among marble pillars and golden arches, among the clash of gladiators and the whisper of senators, there lived a boy who would one day set fire to it all, in body and in spirit. His name was Nero, a name that even now echoes through the dust of history with a shiver of fear and sorrow. He was not born to greatness. Greatness was thrust upon him, shaped by the desperate ambitions of his mother, Agrippina the Younger, a woman whose hunger for power matched any emperor's. She maneuvered, schemed, and sacrificed until her son, her beloved Nero, sat atop the most powerful throne the world had ever known. At 17 years old, Nero became Emperor of Rome. Imagine it for a moment. A boy, barely a man, handed a kingdom so vast that its borders kissed deserts, forests, oceans. A boy worshipped by thousands, feared by millions, offered the keys to absolute power before he had even learned to master his own heart. At first, there was hope. The early years of Nero's reign were filled with promise. Guided by wise advisors like Seneca, the empire seemed steady, perhaps even enlightened. But power is a flame, and Nero, too young and too restless, played with it like a child plays with fire. Soon, the boy who had been hailed as a golden dawn became something far darker. Whispers grew in the marble halls, whispers of vanity, of cruelty, of a hunger for pleasure that knew no end. Nero fancied himself an artist, a poet, a musician. He believed he was born not just to rule men, but to dazzle them, to force the world to adore his songs, his plays, his passions. He ordered theaters built in his honor. He forced senators, proud men of tradition and war, to sit and applaud his endless performances. He demanded Rome itself bow not just to his crown, but to his ego, and woe to those who refused. Friends disappeared. Advisors were exiled or quietly killed. Family members who questioned him were found dead under mysterious circumstances, including, it is said, his own mother, Agrippina, the very woman who had birthed and built his destiny. He turned on her with the same cold cruelty with which he ruled the empire. Some say he tried to have her drowned. When that failed, he simply sent assassins. Blood, it seemed, was no barrier to Nero's ambition. And then came the fire. In the hot, dry summer of 64 AD, flames leapt across the wooden structures of Rome. They raced through narrow streets, feeding on homes, temples, markets, on lives stacked too closely together. The city burned for days. And while Rome wept, while families huddled in ruins, while history itself melted in the fury of the flames. Nero, it is said, sang. Some accounts say he stood on a high balcony, dressed in theatrical robes, playing a lyre and singing of the fall of Troy, as the real city burned beneath him. Whether this is truth or legend hardly matters. What matters is what followed. Nero needed a scapegoat to deflect the anger rising like smoke among his people. He found a convenient enemy, the Christians, a small and misunderstood sect at the time. He blamed them for the fire. He unleashed a wave of cruelty so terrible that even hardened Roman soldiers were said to turn away. Christians were rounded up, tortured, crucified. Some were coated in tar and set ablaze to light Nero's gardens at night. Human torches burning against the night sky, while the emperor watched from a distance, entertained. It was not governance. It was not leadership. It was madness dressed as spectacle. The people who once cheered Nero's ascent now murmured in fear and disgust. The empire that once trembled at the footsteps of its rulers now trembled for other reasons. And yet Nero continued, building his extravagant golden house, a palace so vast and obscene in its luxury that it seemed to mock the very gods themselves. While Rome struggled to rebuild, Nero bathed in the reflected light of his own imagined greatness. But time is a patient enemy, and Rome, though battered, was not broken. Plots grew in shadowed corners. Senators and generals, men who had once sworn loyalty, now whispered of rebellion. They saw the decay spreading from Nero's throne like a disease. And when the end came, it came not with a roar, but with a slow, inevitable unraveling. Nero fled the city he had once ruled as a god. He hid in a villa outside Rome, abandoned by almost everyone who had once flattered and praised him. As soldiers closed in, Nero, trembling and desperate, took his own life. It is said his last words were a pathetic cry for remembrance. What an artist dies in me! But history would not remember Nero as an artist. History would remember him as a madman, as a warning, a boy given the world, and who set it aflame because he could not bear the weight of it. The villa where Nero spent his final hours was far from the splendor he had once commanded. The gold and marble were gone. The adoring crowds were silent. Only a few trembling servants remained, their loyalty born not of love, but of fear and pity. Outside, the air was heavy with the scent of betrayal. Inside, Nero paced like a caged animal, muttering to himself, trying to summon the courage to do what he knew must be done. Death, the one enemy he could not charm. Silence, the one court he could not command. He begged those around him to take his life, but none dared to lift a hand against the emperor, even one so fallen. In the end, it was Nero's own trembling hand that guided the blade, ending not just his reign, but an era soaked in fire and fear. When word of his death spread through Rome, there were no great processions, no solemn mourning, only a strange, uneasy relief, as if a great sickness had finally passed, leaving behind a battered, weary body. Nero's name was quickly stripped from monuments and records. The Senate declared him an enemy of the state. Statues were torn down, inscriptions scratched away. his memory hunted like a criminal long after his body had returned to the dust. But history is not so easily cleansed. Whispers of Nero's reign lingered like smoke in the ruins of burned temples and broken homes. They drifted through the narrow alleys where mothers told cautionary tales to their children at night. They clung to the marble steps of the Senate where new rulers rose, haunted by the memory of a boy who had once ruled as a god and died as a fugitive. Even centuries later, the name Nero carries a weight of warning, a reminder that the trappings of power cannot hide the rot within, and that cruelty, no matter how richly adorned, will eventually be revealed. The empire he ruled outlived him. Rome endured, wounded, weary, but unbroken. New emperors came and went. New roads were built. New songs were sung. But somewhere beneath the stones, beneath the foundations of new temples and grand arenas, the memory of Nero slept. A quiet warning carved into the very bones of the city. It is said that during the years after his death, impostors appeared, claiming to be Nero, returned from the grave. Some gained followers, some sparked fear. The idea of his return was so terrifying, so unthinkable, that even the possibility sent ripples through a world eager to forget. And perhaps that is the final legacy of rulers like Nero. Not the palaces they build, nor the coins they mint in their image, but the fear they leave behind. A fear so deep that even their shadows are enough to cause trembling. Tonight, as you listen, as your breath softens and your mind drifts closer to the quiet embrace of sleep, remember this: power given without wisdom is a dangerous flame, and even the mightiest can fall, not in battle, but by the weight of their own unchecked desires. May your dreams be free from such fires. May your heart remain humble, even when fortune smiles. May you, unlike Nero, find strength not in the applause of crowds, but in the quiet certainty of kindness, of goodness, of wisdom. The world is filled with those who seek to be remembered through fear, but true legacy, real, lasting legacy, is carved in gentleness, in mercy, in compassion. As the stars wheel silently above, as the moon casts its soft silver glow upon the earth, let us leave behind the broken echoes of Nero's reign. Let them fade into the darkness from which they came, mere lessons wrapped in sorrow. The fires he lit have long since died. The songs he forced upon the world are forgotten. Only the truth remains, that power without soul becomes a prison, not just for those ruled, but for the ruler himself. And in the end, even the brightest crown offers no protection against the cold hand of history. Rest easy, traveler of the past. Let the lessons of Nero settle softly in your dreams, not as burdens, but as gentle warnings. For tomorrow is a new page, a blank parchment upon which you may write stories of kindness and wisdom that no fire can erase. Sleep now, sleep in peace. The night is long and forgiving, and we are merely passing through. In the quiet years that followed Nero's fall, Rome tried to heal itself. The Senate reclaimed its voice. Generals marched not for one man's madness, but for a fragile sense of order. The fires were extinguished. The ashes were swept away. And yet, the memory of what had burned lingered in every shadow. Fathers spoke to sons of the days when emperors sang while cities died. Mothers warned daughters of leaders who loved only their own reflection. And in the marketplace, where coins with Nero's face still circulated like bitter ghosts, people learned to measure rulers not by the gold on their heads, but by the weight of their hearts. The empire that had once crowned Nero with such blind hope grew wiser, harder. Trust was no longer given freely. It was earned slowly, painfully, like rebuilding a house from blackened stones. There were whispers, still, of Nero's charm, of his early days, when he showed mercy, when he spoke of peace, when he promised to listen to the people. Some remembered the young boy with clear eyes and a hesitant smile, the boy who could have been something different, something better, but promises, once broken, become heavier than iron, and charm, once twisted, cuts deeper than any sword. In time, Rome crowned new emperors, some better, some worse, but none ever quite like Nero, none whose fall burned so brightly, so terribly, across the pages of time. It is easy to blame Nero alone for all that happened, easy to paint him as a monster born from nothing but cruelty. But perhaps the greater tragedy is this: he was not born a monster, he was made by a mother who saw him not as a child, but as a weapon, made by courtiers who fed his vanity like wine until he could no longer taste anything else, made by a world that crowned him godlike before he had learned the quiet strength of being simply human. And so he became a king of shadows, a boy who ruled an empire but could not rule his own fears, a man who demanded love but did not understand how to give it. There is a sadness in his story, hidden beneath the horror, a sadness that speaks quietly, if you are willing to listen. It reminds us that power without guidance is a storm, that ambition without kindness is a fire, and that loneliness, when fed by pride, can turn even the brightest promise into ash. As you listen now, as the world outside fades into the soft hush of sleep, imagine for a moment Nero standing alone in those final hours. No crown upon his head, no music playing, no crowds cheering, just a broken man, wrapped in silence, holding a blade he feared as much as he needed. A boy once promised the world, now fearing even his own name. It is easy to hate such a figure, harder, but perhaps wiser, to pity him, because, in the end, Nero did not destroy Rome. Rome survived. Rome grew. Rome endured. It was Nero himself who was destroyed. Eaten from within by the very flames, he set loose upon the world. Tonight, as you rest, let his story be a quiet reminder that greatness without goodness is a hollow thing, that power without love is a crown of thorns, that the greatest empires are built not with fear, but with trust, patience, and the slow, steady work of kindness. Let your heart remember the people of Rome, the merchants who rebuilt their shops, the mothers who rebuilt their homes, the children who learned to laugh again among the ruins. They are the true heroes of this story, not the emperors, not the generals, not the golden statues gathering dust in forgotten corners, but the ordinary souls who refused to let fire be the final word. And so must we all, in our small lives, in our quiet corners of the world, we too build empires, not of marble and stone, but of kindness, of mercy, of dreams. May yours be built strong. May yours outlast the fires of pride and anger. May yours be a legacy of light, not of ashes, as the stars spin silently overhead, as the night deepens around you like a velvet cloak. Know this, you are part of a history far older and deeper than kings. You are part of the great, patient river of humanity that carries forward the hopes of countless souls who came before. Rest easy tonight. Leave Nero to his fading echoes. Let his mistakes drift away like smoke in the dark. Hold close instead the lessons he left behind, precious and hard-earned. Kindness, humility, wisdom. These are the true empires worth building, and they are yours to claim. Sleep now. The night is gentle, and tomorrow waits with new pages, new hopes, new songs. Songs sung not to burning cities, but to rising suns. Somewhere, deep in the soil of Rome, buried beneath layers of time and memory, lies the dust of an empire that once trembled beneath Nero's footsteps. Not the grand Rome of shining marble, but a quieter Rome, a wounded Rome, a Rome that learned to survive, not because of its rulers, but despite them. There are no songs left that praise Nero, no true statues that stand untouched in his honor. What remains are the lessons carved into silence, that power without compassion leads only to ruin, and that those who rule without understanding will, in time, be ruled by fear and loneliness. As Nero's empire collapsed around him, the world he thought he controlled moved on. The people he believed he could bend to his will rose up, not with weapons, but with memory. They remembered the hunger he caused, the cruelty he unleashed, the fires he set, not just in wood and stone, but in the hearts of those he wounded, and in that remembering, they found their strength. The greatest defeat Nero suffered was not from soldiers or senators. It was from the quiet, enduring refusal of the human spirit to be crushed, a spirit that, even in the ashes of a burned city, found a way to dream again. They rebuilt their markets, they rebuilt their temples, they rebuilt their hopes. And while Nero's name slipped into shadows, barely whispered except as a warning, Rome stood, not unchanged, not unscarred, but standing, breathing, alive. If you listen closely, even now, you might hear it, the soft hum of survival, the gentle rustle of pages turning in the libraries of history, where Nero is just one chapter among many, a chapter read not to glorify, but to understand, to learn, to choose better paths, because every generation is given a fire, a spark of power, of passion, of potential, and every generation must choose what to do with it. Some, like Nero, let it consume them. Others build with it homes, families, dreams, hopes stronger than any marble palace. Tonight, as you sink deeper into the quiet folds of sleep, know this. You carry your own fire. You decide whether it burns or builds, whether it scars or shelters. You, not emperors or kings or rulers long gone, shape the world you live in. May you shape it with kindness. May you shape it with patience. May you shape it with the quiet strength that outlasts even the loudest flames. The world does not remember Nero with love. It remembers him with sorrow, with warning. Let that be enough. Let it be the shadow that makes your own light shine brighter. Sleep peacefully, traveler, through time. You have walked among the ruins of broken empires tonight. You have touched the stones once blackened by fire, heard the echoes of songs sung not in celebration, but in mourning. Now leave them behind. Let the fires fade. Let the sorrow settle. Carry forward only the wisdom, only the hope, only the unbreakable truth that kindness, though quieter than cruelty, endures far longer. Tomorrow will come, fresh and new, untouched by the mistakes of the past. And you, with your gentle heart and patient hands, will have the chance to build something stronger, something better. The stars still watch over you. The earth still turns beneath you. And history, vast and endless, still whispers its secrets in your dreams. Rest now. You are safe. You are enough. And you are part of a story still being written. A story where kindness, not cruelty, writes the final lines. Sleep well, sleep deeply, and let your dreams be filled not with emperors and flames, but with gardens, with laughter, with soft mornings waiting just beyond the horizon. The night is yours, the peace is yours, and the story, the real story, belongs to you in the ancient heart of Rome, where marble gleamed beneath the relentless sun and the streets hummed with the weight of centuries. There was born a boy who would one day drench that mighty city in fear. His name was Gaius, though history would remember him differently. They would call him Caligula, a name that, even now, tastes of madness and sorrow when spoken aloud. But once, before the blood and the broken dreams, he was simply a child, a small boy dressed in miniature soldier's boots, Caligula, the soldiers called them, running through the camps of his father's army, adored by legionnaires who saw in him a symbol of hope. His father, Germanicus, was a beloved general, a man of courage, a man of honor, and for a time, the boy Gaius lived in the light of that love, carried on shoulders, sung to sleep by songs of victory, wrapped in a world where loyalty and strength seemed eternal. But the light faded far too soon. When Caligula was only a few years old, Germanicus died under suspicious circumstances. Some whispered of poison, some of betrayal. All that mattered was that the boy, once so full of laughter, now stood in a world suddenly colder, crueler, emptier. His family, once cherished, fell swiftly from favor. His mother was exiled. His brothers died in chains or starved to death. One by one, the pillars of his young life crumbled, and Caligula learned what Rome truly was, a place where smiles hid daggers, where love could turn to hatred overnight. He survived by pretending to be harmless, pretending to be loyal, pretending not to remember all that had been stolen from him. And when the Emperor Tiberius, a man darkened by his own fears and cruelties, called Caligula to his side, the boy obeyed. He lived on the island of Capri, at the emperor's whim, learning lessons no child should ever be taught. He learned that trust was a weakness, that kindness was dangerous, that survival meant burying your heart so deeply that even you could no longer hear it beating. By the time Tiberius died and Caligula was named emperor, Rome erupted in joy. The people cheered. The Senate bowed low. At last, they believed, the nightmare was over. A young, fresh ruler, son of the beloved Germanicus, grandson of heroes, great-nephew of Augustus himself. At last, the golden age would return. For a little while, it seemed it might. Caligula gave generous gifts. He hosted games and festivals. He freed prisoners and honored his family's memory. Rome, bruised and weary from Tiberius's long reign of suspicion, dared to hope again. But the wounds buried deep inside Caligula had not healed. They had only festered. Not long into his rule, an illness struck him. Some say it was a fever. Some say it was poison. Whatever it was, when Caligula rose from his sickbed, something within him had changed. The man who had been crowned with hope now wore a different face, a face twisted by fear, by anger, by a wild, bottomless need to make the world pay for every cruelty he had endured. He stopped pretending. The boy who had learned that love could vanish turned away from love altogether. The young man who had learned that kindness could be punished abandoned kindness completely. He ruled not with reason, but with whim, not with justice, but with vengeance. The Senate, once respected, became his toy. He humiliated proud senators in public, forcing them to grovel, to degrade themselves for his amusement. He declared himself a living god, demanding worship, not service, from those who once advised his ancestors. He emptied the imperial treasury on grand spectacles, chariot races, gladiator battles, theatrical performances where actors played the deaths of real prisoners. He built lavish palaces for his horses. He spoke of making his favorite horse, Incitatus, a consul of Rome. Some said it was madness. Some said it was cruelty. Perhaps it was both, because beneath every act of cruelty, every flash of madness, there still beat the heart of a boy who had learned, far too young, that nothing was sacred, nothing was safe, and if the world was cruel, Caligula would be crueler. If the world had abandoned him, he would abandon it in turn. Thus, Rome, the eternal city, found itself under the thumb of a ruler who saw life as a stage for his rage and sorrow, a ruler who had known suffering too early, too deeply, and who now inflicted that suffering without mercy. The days under Caligula grew darker with each passing season. At first, the Senate laughed nervously at his strange commands, thinking them foolish, but harmless. But soon, the laughter stopped, for Caligula did not simply wish to rule Rome, he wished to own it, body and soul. He demanded not only obedience, but humiliation, not only taxes, but offerings as to a god. He ordered statues of himself placed in temples beside the ancient gods of Rome. He demanded that priests pray to him. He insisted that the people worship not only his power, but his madness. And woe to those who hesitated. A senator who faltered in praise might find his home burned. A soldier who bowed too slowly might disappear without a trace. A noblewoman who refused his advances might watch her family vanish, piece by piece. Caligula's cruelty was not always grand or bloody. Often, it was small, sharp, personal. A glance, A whisper, a ruined life dropped carelessly like a broken toy. He made a spectacle of suffering. He turned Rome into his stage, its people into unwilling actors in plays written only for his amusement. Once, it is said, he invited his guests to a grand banquet, gilded tables, mountains of food, oceans of wine, and as they laughed and drank under the glittering lights, he casually announced that any of them could be executed at his command simply because he willed it. The laughter died. The wine turned sour in the mouths of the guests, and Caligula smiled, basking in their fear, like a child who has discovered a new game. In the streets, whispers began to spread like smoke, whispers of executions ordered for imagined slights, whispers of families wiped out because of a dream the emperor claimed to have had, whispers that no one, not even the closest friends of Caligula, were truly safe. He made a mockery of the laws. He emptied the treasury. He insulted foreign dignitaries, turning Rome into a city of uneasy laughter and quiet dread. But perhaps what made Caligula's reign most terrifying was not just his violence, but his unpredictability. One day, he might rain gifts and favors upon a man. The next, he might sentence him to death for no reason at all. There was no pattern, no logic, no safety. Even the gods seemed powerless before him. And yet, somewhere beneath the madness, the boy who had once run laughing through army camps, the boy who had once clung to his father's memory, still lived, broken, lost, twisted beyond recognition, but still there, in moments of rare silence, in the dark hours of the night. Perhaps even Caligula wondered what he had become. Perhaps he heard the echoes of his own childhood, the songs sung by soldiers who loved him, the promises whispered by his father of a life filled with honor and hope. Perhaps he wept in secret for what could never be reclaimed. But if he did, the dawn always found him harder, colder, more cruel than before. As the months passed, Rome grew restless. The Senate plotted in shadows. The Praetorian Guard, sworn to protect the emperor, whispered among themselves. The city that had once welcomed Caligula with open arms now waited with bated breath for the moment when its nightmare would end, and Caligula, wrapped in his illusions of godhood, seemed unaware, or perhaps he simply no longer cared. He had built a world where love was impossible, where loyalty was a mask worn only until it was no longer convenient, where trust was a joke told between clenched teeth. And so, inevitably, betrayal came. In the early months of the year, a plot was hatched among those closest to him, men he had once trusted, men he had humiliated one too many times. The plan was simple: a knife in the right moment, a body left cooling on the marble floors of the palace. Caligula, emperor, god, madman, child, would fall like any other man. The day of Caligula's death dawned like any other, bright and unsuspecting. The marble streets of Rome gleamed under the golden sun. The people moved carefully through their routines, weighed down by the invisible chains of fear that had become part of daily life. Inside the palace, Caligula walked among his courtiers, laughing, jesting, living in the grand illusion he had spun around himself. To him, He was untouchable, immortal, a god among men. But in the hearts of those closest to him, rebellion had already bloomed. It was during a series of games held in the imperial theater that the final act was set into motion. The conspirators waited, nerves strung tight like bowstrings, as Caligula, drunk on his own sense of invincibility, made his way through the narrow passageways behind the stage. There, away from the watching crowds, the knives found him. History tells us that he cried out, not in rage, not in royal command, but in disbelief, as if, until the very last moment, he could not comprehend that he, Caligula, the god emperor, the child of destiny, could fall to something as small, as human, as betrayal. The first blow stunned him. The second brought him to his knees. The third ended the reign of Rome's most feared ruler. His blood pooled on the white marble, staining it forever with a memory that no tide of years could wash away. And for a moment, the world held its breath. The conspirators, their knives slick with imperial blood, looked at each other, almost uncertain. The guards, stunned, did not move. Even the city outside, busy and bustling just moments before, seemed to fall silent, as if waiting to understand what had happened. Caligula, the boy who had lost everything, the man who had ruled with madness and cruelty, was gone. What followed was chaos. The Senate tried to restore the Republic, believing that with the tyrant dead, Rome could return to its ancient traditions. But the people, confused and frightened, demanded a new emperor. The empire, once created to last 1,000 years, had become addicted to the idea of a single divine ruler, even if that ruler was cruel. And so, Caligula's uncle, Claudius, was dragged from his hiding place behind a curtain and proclaimed emperor before he could even catch his breath. The cycle continued. The memory of Caligula, however, did not fade so easily. In the months after his death, Rome tried to erase him. His statues were smashed. His name was scratched from public records. The coins bearing his face were melted down and recast with safer images. It was as if Rome, in its shame, hoped that by erasing the symbols, it could erase the pain. But memory does not work that way. The scars left by Caligula were not carved in marble. They were carved into the hearts of those who had lived under his rule, into the mothers who had lost sons for the emperor's amusement, into the fathers who had watched their daughters taken for his pleasure, into the streets that had echoed with false laughter and real weeping, and in some deep, unspoken way, Caligula remained part of Rome's soul, a shadow stretching long into the future, not because he was great, not because he was loved, but because he was a reminder of how quickly hope can rot into horror, of how fragile the line is between celebration and sorrow, of how even the brightest promises can be twisted beyond recognition by pain left untended. It is easy, from the safe distance of centuries, to laugh at the tales of Caligula's madness, to tell stories of a horse-made consul, of emperors dressing as gods, of dinners where death sat beside dessert. But when you listen closely, not to the rumors, but to the heartbeat of history, you hear something else. You hear the sound of a child's laughter turning into a scream, You hear the echo of dreams betrayed. You hear a soul lost, wandering through the gilded halls of power, seeking something it could never find. And so, Caligula's story is not merely one of cruelty, it is one of sorrow, of what happens when pain is left to fester, when grief is crowned instead of healed. Tonight, as the world outside your window softens into sleep, hold this memory gently, not as a burden, not as a fear, but as a quiet lesson, a reminder that even the smallest wounds, if ignored, can grow sharp enough to cut down kings, that even the brightest souls, if starved of love, can burn the world to ash, just to feel warm for a moment, and that your kindness, your patience, your understanding carries a weight greater than any empire. Let it be your crown. Let it be your shield. Sleep now, traveler through the ruined palaces of time. The echoes of Caligula fade behind you. The night stretches ahead, vast and forgiving, waiting for you to dream of gentler kings and brighter tomorrows. Far from the marble palaces and broken statues, far from the shattered echoes of a once golden boy's laughter, Rome healed, slowly, painfully, but it healed. The people who had once cheered Caligula's rise and wept through his reign learned again to hope. They found new leaders, new dreams. They rebuilt the faith that cruelty had tried to shatter. The mothers sang lullabies once more. The merchants opened their stalls. The poets wrote verses that spoke not of fear, but of the stubborn beauty of endurance. And though the shadow of Caligula stretched long across the years, it grew fainter with time, not forgotten, never forgotten, but softened, mourned not with anger, but with quiet sadness, because there is always sadness at the loss of what could have been. Had Caligula's heart been held with gentler hands when he was young, perhaps he might have ruled differently. Had he known love without fear, safety without betrayal, perhaps he might have led Rome into a true golden age. But fate, once set in motion, rarely turns aside for what might have been. And so, the city he loved and hated, the people he cherished and tormented, moved forward without him. History remembers Caligula as a madman, as a monster, as a tyrant whose reign blazed briefly and terribly before it was snuffed out by his own hand, his own madness, his own grief. But history also whispers another truth, a quieter one. That power given to the wounded can wound entire worlds. That laughter, twisted by pain, can become cruelty. That loneliness, crowned with gold, can destroy far more than it ever saves. Tonight, as you lay still beneath the slow, turning stars, remember not just the cruelty of Caligula, but the sadness, the longing, the small boy lost in the endless corridors of ambition and betrayal. Let your heart be stronger than fear. Let your dreams be kinder than the histories we have wandered through. Know that you are not powerless, even in a world shaped by broken kings. You are the quiet architect of something better. With every gentle word, with every patient act, with every refusal to return cruelty for cruelty, you are building a world where no child will have to learn that love is a lie, where no ruler will rise on a throne built from loneliness and rage, where power will not be a weapon, but a trust, Sleep now, with that hope tucked close to your heart. Sleep with the comfort that the past, though painful, is not your prison. It is your teacher. And tomorrow, when you wake, the world will be waiting for your hands, your voice, your dreams to weave something new. Leave behind the palaces of sorrow. Walk instead into gardens of mercy, into fields of laughter that no fear can burn away. The night has carried you far across the ages. The stars have kept watch, and now, gently, tenderly, they sing you home. Rest well, traveler. The kings are gone. The pain is past. Only you remain, whole, hopeful, and free. Sleep deeply, sleep in peace, and let kindness be the crown you wear when morning comes. Far to the east, where winters bite harder than steel, and forests stretch farther than sight, there once rose a boy who would change the fate of an empire. His name was Ivan, and though history would call him many things, ruler, Tsar, emperor, it would remember him most by one name whispered in shivers, Ivan the Terrible. But once, before the crowns and the cruelties, he was only a boy who walked cold stone corridors in a crumbling palace, a boy whose tiny hands touched walls, worn down by the endless passing of forgotten kings, a boy whose heart ached with a hunger no feast could satisfy, a hunger not for food, but for love, for safety, for warmth. Ivan's childhood was not the childhood of a prince, wrapped in silk and songs. It was a cold, cruel training ground. His father, Grand Prince Vasily, died when Ivan was just 3 years old. His mother, Elena, became regent, only to die under mysterious, whispered circumstances when Ivan was barely 8. Some said she was poisoned, some said she was betrayed. Whatever the truth, one thing was certain. Ivan was left alone, alone in a court full of vultures who wore fine robes, alone in a castle where every smile hid a knife, alone in a world where power mattered more than kindness, where survival meant learning to strike before you could be struck. And so he learned. He learned that trust was a weakness, that love was a lie, that cruelty was safer than hope. By the time he was crowned Tsar of all the Russias at the age of 16, the boy even had been replaced by something harder, colder, more dangerous. At first, there was a glimmer of light. Ivan spoke of justice. He reformed laws. He built churches. He dreamed of a Russia strong, united, rising from the shadows. But dreams built on broken hearts rarely stand for long. As years passed, the old wounds of his youth festered. Paranoia grew in him like ivy, wrapping tighter with every betrayal, every whisper of rebellion, every shadow that fell too close. He began to see enemies everywhere, in boyars, in generals, even in the common people, and he decided that mercy was a luxury he could no longer afford. The man who once dreamed of justice became a ruler who wielded terror as his sword and suspicion as his shield. He created the Oprichnina, a private force loyal only to him, dressed in black robes, riding black horses, bringing black days to every village they touched. Their orders were simple: root out treason. Their methods were savage: torture, execution, exile. Entire families disappeared, towns were razed, blood soaked the snows of Russia until the very earth seemed to cry out in grief. And Ivan watched it all with eyes that had long since forgotten how to cry. There were moments when glimpses of the boy he once was still flickered, when he knelt in dusty churches, weeping for the salvation he feared he could never earn, when he fasted, prayed, scourged himself in desperate hope that he could be more than what he had become. But always, the old ghosts whispered louder, the ghosts of loneliness, the ghosts of betrayal, the ghosts of fear. He trusted no one, not his advisors, not his friends, not even his family. And in one terrible moment, in a fit of blinding rage, Ivan struck his own son, the one person he might have loved, struck him so hard that the young prince fell, bleeding, dying at his feet, the son who would have inherited Russia, who might have led it into a brighter future, gone in a single heartbeat. It is said that Ivan cradled his son's broken body, weeping, begging for forgiveness no living voice could offer. It is said that he roamed the halls afterward like a ghost himself, haunted by what he could not undo. For all his crowns, all his armies, all his conquests, Ivan could not defeat the sorrow he had unleashed upon his own soul. After the death of his son, Ivan was never truly the same. He had always walked a path shadowed by loneliness and fear. But now the path grew darker still. His steps became slower, heavier, as if each day he carried the weight of all the lives he had broken. Russia, too, bore the scars of his sorrow and rage. Fields once rich with harvests now lay barren. Villages once full of laughter stood silent, their doors swinging in the cold winds. The people, beaten and weary, looked to the skies more often than they looked to their Tsar, praying for deliverance he could no longer provide. Even in his final years, Ivan could not find peace. He turned his court into a game of suspicion and cruelty. No one was safe. At any moment, a jest, a glance, a forgotten courtesy could be twisted into a betrayal, punishable by death. He trusted no one, and in return was trusted by none. Ivan would sit in his palace, surrounded by treasures from lands he had conquered, dressed in heavy robes, crowned with gold. Yet there was no warmth there, no joy. He would spend hours brooding, muttering prayers, questioning those around him, with eyes too tired to believe any answers. His heart had become a battlefield where hope and despair waged a quiet, endless war. Those few who dared to serve him learned to tread carefully, to smile and bow, and speak only what was safe. And still, many fell to his unpredictable anger. It was as if the boy who had once yearned for love had decided long ago that if he could not be loved, he would at least be feared. And so he was, feared in every corner of his kingdom, feared in every whispered conversation, feared even in the dreams of those who had never seen his face. But fear, like fire, burns away more than enemies. It burns away loyalty. It burns away trust. It burns away the very foundations of the empire it seeks to protect. By the time Ivan reached the twilight of his reign, Russia was a wounded giant, vast, powerful, but hollowed out by decades of terror. And yet Ivan's ambitions never dimmed. He dreamed of further conquests. He dreamed of glory that would outshine the bloodshed. He dreamed of a legacy strong enough to drown out the cries of the past. But time, patient and unyielding, had other plans. On a cold March day in 1584, Ivan sat down to play a game of chess, one of the few pleasures he still allowed himself. His advisors watched, silent and cautious, as he moved the pieces with shaking hands. Then, without warning, he collapsed. Some say he had a seizure. Some say his heart, battered and broken by years of rage and regret, simply gave out. Whatever the truth, Ivan the Terrible, the boy who had once been left alone in cold corridors, the man who had built and burned an empire, was dead. There was no great parade for his passing. No songs of mourning filled the streets. Only a deep, exhausted silence, as if the very land itself needed to catch its breath after so many years of fear. Ivan's body was laid to rest in St. Basile's Cathedral, beneath the colorful onion domes that still rise like frozen flames into the Moscow sky. His tomb was covered in gold and jewels, but no treasure could hide the shadows that clung to his name. For generations afterward, mothers in Russia would quiet unruly children by whispering, "Be still, or Ivan the Terrible will come for you." His memory became a warning, a shadow stretching long across the centuries. And yet, even now, there are some who look back and see not just the monster, but the broken child within him, the boy who could have been a different man if only love and kindness had found him first. It is not to excuse his cruelty. It is not to erase the rivers of sorrow he unleashed. But perhaps it is to understand that even the worst among us are not born monsters. They are shaped, wound by wound, scar by scar, silence by silence. Tonight, as you close your eyes and drift deeper into sleep, remember Ivan, not with hatred, but with a quiet sadness, a sadness for what was lost, for what could have been. May you build your life not on fear, but on trust, not on suspicion, but on hope, not on power, but on kindness. Let the story of Ivan the Terrible settle softly into your dreams as a gentle reminder that the heart, left untended, can grow sharp and wild, and that the smallest acts of love, the quietest words of comfort, can save even the most forgotten soul from becoming a ghost among the living. Rest now, traveler. The past has spoken its truths for tonight. Let its echoes fade. Let its lessons linger, soft and steady, like a lantern in the dark. There are better empires yet to build, empires of compassion, of patience, of light stronger than any throne. Sleep well. The stars turn overhead, ancient and untroubled, and tomorrow's dreams wait quietly for you. Long after Ivan's body was lowered into the cold earth, his spirit seemed to linger in the land he once ruled with such trembling force, in lonely forests where the wind sighs through bare branches, in forgotten villages where old women still light candles against the long winters. His name is spoken not with anger, but with a sorrow that runs deeper than blame, because Ivan's story is not just the story of a cruel king. It is the story of a heart abandoned too young, a soul hardened by betrayal, a mind shaped by endless fear. And though his hand wrote terrible chapters in the book of Russia's history, It was fear, not true malice, that guided his pen. Perhaps the saddest truth of all is that Ivan loved his country deeply, loved it in the only way he knew how, with fierce jealousy, with desperate control, with a love so twisted by pain that it looked more like hatred than devotion. He dreamed of a Russia powerful enough to never again see a child like him left, vulnerable, afraid, alone. But in chasing that dream, with terror and violence, he became the very nightmare he once feared. And so, in his attempts to save his people from betrayal, he betrayed them himself. In trying to make Russia strong, he left it scarred. In seeking love, he sowed only fear. The world he left behind was one of contradictions. Cathedrals of breathtaking beauty rose under his rule, even as fields were burned. Laws were reformed for justice, even as innocents were dragged from their homes. Russia expanded, grew richer, mightier, but at a cost so heavy that even generations later, the echoes of that sorrow could still be felt in every crack of every stone. When we look back on Ivan's life, it is tempting to divide it neatly into good and evil, to say he was a monster and nothing more. But human hearts are not so simple. In Ivan, there lived both the frightened boy and the merciless Tsar, the dreamer and the destroyer, the one who prayed for salvation and the one who brought ruin with his own hands. And perhaps it is this broken, tangled knot of longing and terror, that makes his story linger in the memory so stubbornly, because we recognize, if we are honest, a little of Ivan's fear in ourselves, the fear of being hurt, the fear of being alone, the fear that the world will forget us, betray us, leave us behind. But where Ivan let his fear harden into cruelty, we are given the chance to choose differently. We can choose kindness over suspicion. We can choose forgiveness over vengeance. We can choose to build our lives not on fear, but on trust, even when trust feels fragile. Tonight, as you breathe in the soft hush of the sleeping world, remember this. Your story is not written in fear. It is written in the choices you make when no one is watching. It is written in the small mercies, the quiet kindnesses, the gentle hopes you carry into each new day. Ivan's reign ended in sorrow, but your story, your empire, can be different. Let the lessons of the past settle quietly in your heart. Let them strengthen you, not with armor, but with understanding. Let them remind you that power is never enough, that fear is never a foundation strong enough to build a life upon, that love, fragile and patient and brave, is always the better choice. The snow still falls over the land Ivan once ruled. The rivers still wind their way through fields where he once marched his armies. The bells of cathedrals he ordered to be built still ring out across silent mornings, but the hands that built and burned and broke are dust now, scattered to the winds of time. And the people, the ones he ruled, the ones he feared, they endure. Their laughter rises again over fields once silent. Their songs fill the air once emptied by sorrow. Their dreams outlive the darkest nights. So too will yours. Sleep now, traveler of distant times. Let the story of Ivan drift away like mist on a morning breeze. Hold instead the lesson he could never learn. that true strength is not found in cruelty, but in compassion. The stars above you know no czars, no kings, no crowns. They shine alike on the mighty and the meek. They remember only the light. Tonight, may you find that light within yourself, quiet, steady, enduring, a beacon against the dark, a promise that no matter how long the night, dawn always comes. Rest, easy, you are safe. You are stronger than the fears that once ruled empires, and you are far more powerful than the shadows left behind. Sleep well. The world waits for your light. Long ago, when the forests of England were thick and deep, when castles rose like lonely giants against misty skies, there lived a king whose name would be remembered not with pride, but with sorrow. His name was John, a son of kings, a brother of legends, a ruler who could have been a savior, but chose instead to become a shadow across his land. He was not meant to rule. Born as the youngest son of King Henry II and Eleanor of Aquitaine, John grew up in the long shadows of his elder brothers, warriors, heroes, leaders of men. There was young Henry, the shining prince. There was Richard, the Lionheart, whose name sang on the lips of every bard. And there, always last, always overlooked, was John, in halls filled with laughter and plotting. John learned to listen with sharp ears, to watch with sharper eyes, to understand that love and favor were coins easily spent, easily lost. While his brothers rode to battle and glory, John was left behind to study, to wait, to wonder if he would ever be more than a forgotten son. That loneliness took root deep in his heart, and from it grew ambition, a hunger not for greatness, but for possession, not to serve, but to control. When his brother Richard went to fight in the distant Crusades, John saw his chance. He whispered in dark corridors. He built alliances in shadow. He plotted not to protect England, but to claim it. And though Richard returned, wounded but still mighty, the seed had been planted. When Richard finally died, an arrow taking him from the world too soon, John seized the crown. The lords of England knelt. The church blessed his reign. The people, weary of war and loss, dared to hope. But John's heart, hardened by years of bitterness, held no room for mercy. He ruled with suspicion, not trust, with greed, not generosity, with fear, not fairness. He taxed his people until the fields lay barren and the poor sold their tools just to pay his endless demands. He quarreled with the church, earning the condemnation of the Pope himself. He lost vast lands in France through foolish wars, squandering the legacy left by generations before him. And when his nobles, driven beyond endurance, dared to challenge him, John answered, not with wisdom, but with cruelty. He demanded hostages, sons of noble families, to ensure loyalty. And when rebellion stirred, he showed the depths of his ruthlessness. One story, whispered through centuries, tells of Arthur of Brittany, John's young nephew, a boy with a claim to the throne that many considered stronger than John's own. Oh, boy beloved by many, a boy who vanished under John's watchful eye. Some say John murdered him with his own hands in a fit of rage. Some say Arthur was thrown into the cold, dark river, bound and silenced forever. Whatever the truth, it stained John's name with a darkness no crown could hide. The land groaned under his rule. The people prayed not for his reign to flourish, but for it to end. And still, John demanded more gold, more power, more submission. When the barons of England finally rose against him, they did not do so lightly. They did so with the desperation of men who had nothing left to lose. Forced to the muddy fields of Runnymede under the heavy summer sky, John was made to sign the Magna Carta, a document that placed the king, for the first time, beneath the law, a document born from the failure of a ruler to honor the trust given to him. John signed, but he did not change. He saw the Magna Carta not as a promise, but as a humiliation to be undone at the first opportunity. And so England fell into civil war, a kingdom torn by the greed of one man. As the war raged, John fled across his lands, dragging his army, his court, and his heavy, laden treasure wagons behind him, through storms and swollen rivers, through sodden fields and shattered villages. He ran, a king without honor, a ruler without love. The rain fell heavy on the English countryside as John fled from one stronghold to another. His treasure wagons struggled behind him, weighed down with gold ripped from churches, from peasants, from desperate hands that could give no more. Through thick mud and churning rivers, they traveled, growing slower, weaker, more desperate with each mile. Somewhere along the banks of the Wash, a broad stretch of marshland where the sea crept inland and the ground turned treacherous. Underfoot, disaster struck. The tides rose faster than expected. The wagons, heavy with ill-gotten wealth, sank into the sucking mud. Chest after chest of gold, silver, and jeweled crowns slipped beneath the surface, swallowed forever by the gray, indifferent waters. It is said that John stood watching, helpless, as his treasure disappeared, that he screamed curses into the rising wind, that he raged and wept and trembled, not for the people he had wronged, not for the kingdom he had broken, but for the gold he could no longer clutch in his hands. That moment, a king brought low not by armies, but by the slow, steady pull of the earth itself, was the beginning of his true end. Sick with rage and exhaustion, John pressed onward, his body growing weaker even as his anger grew hotter. He fell ill, some say from fever, some from heartbreak, some from a poison. He brewed himself in his endless, gnawing bitterness. He retreated to Newark Castle, his body burning with sickness, his mind haunted by shadows. There, in the cold stone chambers, he faced the one enemy he could not bribe, threaten, or betray: death. As his strength ebbed away, John was left alone with the full weight of his life, the betrayals he had sown, the trust he had shattered, the country he had drained dry. No songs were sung at his bedside. No loyal hands held his own. Only the cold stone walls bore witness to the fall of a king who had spent a lifetime ensuring that when the end came, no one would mourn. When John died in October 1216, there was no mourning procession. No grieving crowds lined the muddy roads. Only the necessities of power moved quickly. A new king crowned, a new oath sworn, a new chapter begun, and England, battered and broken though she was, breathed again. The Magna Carta, The document John had signed in reluctant fury survived. Him, it became more than a symbol of rebellion. It became a foundation stone for the future, a quiet, stubborn promise that even the mightiest must answer to the laws of the land. John's name became a warning, not because he was a conqueror, not because he was a builder, but because he was a breaker of promises, of people, of hope. He showed the world that power wielded without care destroys not only the ruled, but the ruler himself. That greed, when it grows unchecked, consumes everything it touches, even the heart that first fed it. Even now, centuries later, John's name stirs unease. Even now, when lists are made of England's worst kings, his name is written first. And yet, in the quiet spaces of history, beyond the chronicles and the judgments, there is also a whisper of something softer, a recognition that cruelty is not born overnight, that kings, like all men, are shaped by the fears and hungers they do not know how to heal. John's hunger for approval, for control, for more than he could ever hold, was a hunger fed by loneliness and rejection. Had he found peace in himself, he might have ruled differently. Had he trusted the hands offered to him, he might have been remembered for more than betrayal. But he did not, and so his crown became a burden. His name became a shadow, and his memory became a warning carved into the very soul of England. Tonight, as you lay still beneath the patient stars, let John's story settle softly in your mind, not as a tale of monsters, but as a reminder of the simple, terrible truth that power without love is empty, that ambition without compassion is hollow, that no treasure, no castle, no crown can ever replace the simple, stubborn strength of trust. Let your heart choose differently. Choose kindness over conquest. Choose honesty over fear. Choose to build, not to break. For while kings rise and fall, while empires crumble into dust, the quiet acts of mercy we offer each other endure far beyond the reach of any throne. Rest now. The past is behind you. The future is yours to shape. Gently, patiently, bravely. And may your dreams be filled not with gold sinking into the earth, but with seeds of hope planted in richer soil. In the cold earth of Newark, King John was laid to rest, not with great mourning, not with songs and banners, but with a quiet, uneasy relief that passed through the land like the first warm breath of spring after a brutal winter. The monks who buried him did so out of duty, not devotion. The nobles who once swore loyalty to his crown barely spoke his name as they turned their hearts to the next ruler. The common folk, worn thin by years of taxes and terror, offered no prayers for his soul. The earth closed over him. The stones sealed him away, and the world moved on. But history, patient and unforgiving, did not move on so easily. It carried John's memory forward like a scar, a reminder stitched into every generation that power without purpose is a wound, not a blessing. That crowns, when worn without compassion, become chains. In the years that followed his death, England began to heal. The Magna Carta, battered but unbroken, laid the first stones of what would one day become the rights of all people, not just the powerful. It whispered the first dreams of a world where kings were not above the law, where justice could not be bought with gold or silenced with fear. John, in his failures, had planted seeds he never intended, seeds of accountability, seeds of freedom. Perhaps that is the strange mercy of history, that even the darkest rains can leave behind the faintest traces of light. But John himself remains a figure draped in shadow. Stories of his cruelty lived long after his body returned to dust. Tales of his greed, his betrayals, his rages and humiliations passed from father to son, from mother to daughter. He became a cautionary tale, told beside roaring hearth fires, a ghost that haunted the dreams of kings who followed, a name invoked whenever power grew too cruel, whenever rulers forgot that they too could fall. And yet, behind all the tales, behind all the anger, there is also a flicker of sadness, because John was not born to be a tyrant. He was born a child, small, hopeful, trusting. He was born into a world of expectations he could never meet, of comparisons he could never escape, of wounds he could never heal. Perhaps in another life, with gentler hands to guide him, John might have been different. Perhaps he might have ruled wisely, loved deeply, built greatly. But history does not remember what might have been. It remembers what was. It remembers the boy who grew into a man ruled by fear. It remembers the king who chose suspicion over trust, cruelty over kindness, greed over grace, and it remembers the price he paid. A crown weighed down with sorrow, a throne built on shifting sands, a name forever tied not to triumph, but to warning. Tonight, as you drift further from the waking world, let John's story settle into your dreams, not as a burden, but as a lesson softly told. The lesson that what we nurture grows, that what we starve withers, that the heart, left alone and hardened by fear, becomes a prison no gold can unlock, and that you, with every small act of patience, every quiet choice to trust, every gentle offering of mercy, are building a world stronger than any fortress, richer than any king's treasure. Rest now. The ghosts of broken kings cannot follow you here. Their lessons linger, but their chains do not. You are free to build something better, something kinder, something lasting. The night wraps itself gently around you, as soft and forgiving as the earth that once closed over John's tomb. The stars wheel above, indifferent to crowns and thrones, loyal only to the steady turning of hope across time. Sleep deeply, traveler. Tomorrow's world waits for your hands, your heart, your dreams, and it will be a better world, because you will choose to build, not to break. As the years turned and kings rose and fell, John's memory remained, not carved proudly into stone, but whispered quietly in lessons passed down through time. He became a ghost at the edges of England's proud history, not the shining figure in stained glass windows, not the hero sung of in ballads, but the warning carried in the spaces between the lines. A reminder that even the highest crown cannot protect a heart twisted by bitterness. A reminder that even a king is no greater than the trust of his people, no richer than the mercy he shows, no stronger than the love he chooses to give. John built no lasting monuments. No songs were written in his name. No celebrations marked the anniversaries of his reign. Instead, his legacy lived on in the whispered prayers of the poor he had burdened, in the cautious hopes of barons who had dared to demand that no man, not even a king, could stand above the law, in the ink of the Magna Carta, smudged and weathered, but still alive, a quiet, stubborn promise to generations yet unborn. It is strange, sometimes, the gifts history leaves us. John gave England no peace, no prosperity, no golden age, but in his failures, in the hollow ruin of his reign, he left behind the first fragile blueprint for something better. And so even he, the king forgotten and despised, became part of the long, slow story of a people learning to be free. Perhaps that, too, is a kind of redemption, not in glory, not in greatness, but in the warning he offered with every broken vow, every betrayal, every act of greed, a reminder that true strength lies not in hoarded gold, but in trust freely given, not in crowns, but in kindness, not in fear, but in hope. As you drift now into the deeper waters of sleep, let John's story remain with you, not as a heavy weight, but as a soft lantern in the night, a guide that says, choose compassion over conquest, choose courage over cruelty, choose to build bridges, not walls, choose to lift, not to crush. The world will always have its broken kings, its selfish rulers, its cold, crumbling thrones. But the world will also have you, and the quiet, stubborn light you carry forward, and that light, your kindness, your wisdom, your hope, will outlast all the crowns and castles time can ever tear down. Rest now, traveler. The long road through broken empires has brought you here, to a place of peace, of understanding, of strength. Let the stars above you hum their ancient lullabies. Let the earth cradle you in its gentle, steady arms. You are not a king born of loneliness and fear. You are a soul born of dreams and wonder. You are a builder of a world where the mistakes of the past are not repeated, where the lessons of sorrow are woven into a future rich with laughter and love. Sleep deeply, sleep without fear. The kings of old have fallen silent. Their lessons remain carved into the stones of time. And you are the new story, waiting to be written with gentle hands. Dream sweetly, dream bravely, dream of a world made better by every soft choice you make. And when the morning comes, wear your crown of kindness proudly. It will shine brighter than any gold. Far across the mountains and the endless plains, across rivers that wound like silver threads through the earth, there once rose a man who dreamed of a kingdom so mighty, so eternal, that even death itself would be forced to kneel before him. His name was Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China, a boy born into a land of chaos and war, who grew to unite a world torn apart by centuries of bloodshed. But greatness, as it often does, came at a terrible price. From the moment he could walk, Qin Shi Huang lived in the shadow of power, born to a prince during the turbulent Warring States period. He was taught early that trust was dangerous, that love was weakness, that survival meant seeing the world not with hope, but with strategy. As a boy, he watched kingdoms fall. He listened to the screams of battle carried on the wind. He learned that the world belonged not to the kind, but to the cunning. And so, he grew hard, harder than stone, sharper than steel. At just 13 years old, he became king of the state of Qin, a boy king thrust into a court seething with plots and ambition. But where others might have faltered, he thrived. He studied his enemies, learned their fears, exploited their weaknesses. One by one, the rival states fell before him. Han, Zhao, Yan, Wei, Chu, Qi, until, at last, the warring states lay silent at his feet. For the first time in history, China was won, and the boy, who had once looked upon a broken world, crowned himself emperor. Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor, the builder of empires, the unifier of peoples, the master of a world that had known only chaos. But even as the bells of victory rang across the mountains and rivers, a darker note echoed beneath the triumph, because Qin Shi Huang had not forgotten the lessons of his youth. He had not forgotten that power could be lost as swiftly as it was gained. He had not forgotten that death waited for kings as surely as for peasants. And he was determined, with a desperation that hollowed his heart, to escape it. He ruled with a hand of iron. He standardized weights and measures. He unified the written script. He built vast roads and canals that stitched his empire together like veins in a living body. But he also burned books, books that questioned his rule, books that whispered of freedoms he would not allow. He buried scholars alive, men who dared to think differently, who dared to remember a time before him. He ordered walls built, not for beauty, but for defense, early walls that would one day become the Great Wall of China. Thousands died dragging stone across mountains, their bones lost beneath the very walls they helped to raise. To Qin Shi Huang, human lives were stones to be laid for a future that would belong to him alone. And still, it was not enough. In the deepest chambers of his palaces, he sent out secret orders for alchemists to find him the elixir of immortality. He drank strange potions, swallowed poisonous mercury, chasing dreams of endless life, while death crept closer with every poisoned sip. He became haunted by shadows, by assassins imagined and real, by the fear that somewhere, even in his mighty empire, a whisper of rebellion grew. He changed palaces often, traveling the empire he had forged like a ghost, fleeing his own fate. The man who had once conquered all now found himself at war with the one enemy he could not defeat, time. And so, deep beneath the earth, he built himself a tomb so vast it mirrored the empire he had united, with rivers of mercury, ceilings of jeweled stars, and walls guarded by an army of terracotta soldiers, each one unique, each one crafted to stand watch over his soul for eternity, an empire carved in death, because the emperor feared what waited beyond life more than he feared any army. But even in the endless darkness of his grand tomb, even surrounded by walls stronger than any fortress and soldiers carved to protect him forever, Qin Shi Huang could not escape the truth that humbles every king. Death does not bargain. Death does not bow. As the emperor traveled through his empire in search of yet another secret to immortality, illness found him. Far from the gleaming halls of his palaces, far from the golden statues raised in his honor, he grew weak, his body, poisoned by years of strange medicines and unnatural concoctions, began to fail. It is said that in his final days he became restless, pacing the floors of his carriage, muttering commands to ministers too afraid to speak the truth that hung heavy in the air. His breath grew shallow, his vision blurred, and the dreams of eternal rule, dreams he had fought so ruthlessly to protect, crumbled like sand between his fingers. In the end, death came quietly, not with swords or rebellion, not with treachery or battle, but with the slow, inevitable fading of breath. The mighty emperor, who had once commanded millions with a single gesture, lay still, his heart silent, his dreams unfinished. The ministers, terrified of the chaos his death might unleash, hid the news. They kept his body hidden, moving it in secrecy across the empire, dragging the rotting corpse of a man who had once ruled the world. They filled his carriage with fish to mask the smell. They whispered false orders in his name. They delayed the inevitable collapse as long as they could, knowing that when the truth emerged, so too would rebellion. And when at last the truth could no longer be hidden, when the news spilled across the empire like a river breaching its banks, the world Huang had built began to unravel. His sons fought for the throne. His ministers betrayed their oaths. The people he had bound together with force and fear rose up, tearing at the fragile unity he had so painfully forged. And yet, even as his empire fell into pieces, the emperor's tomb remained, silent, immovable, guarded by thousands of silent warriors who had never lived and who would never die. Beneath the earth, he still reigns in darkness, still dreaming of a world he could never truly hold, still seeking an immortality that slipped through his hands like mist. And so, the legacy of Huang became twofold. He is remembered as a great unifier, the man who stitched China together with ambition, vision, and iron will. And he is remembered as a tyrant, a man whose fear of death led him to cruelty, whose dreams of immortality left only sorrow in their wake. His name echoes through time with awe and with sadness, a reminder that even the greatest conquests cannot fill the emptiness left by fear, that even the highest walls cannot protect against the truths we carry within ourselves. He conquered kingdoms, he tamed rivers, he raised mountains of stone, but he could not tame his own heart. He could not conquer his own fear. And in the end, that fear, not his enemies, not his rivals, was what truly defeated him. Tonight, as you drift deeper into the soft embrace of sleep, let the story of Huang settle gently within you. Let it remind you that the search for power without peace of mind is a road that leads only to sorrow, that the quest for immortality, for perfection, for total control, blinds us to the beauty of the life we already hold. The rivers that sang beneath his palaces still flow. The mountains he rode past still rise against the sky. The stars he feared to leave behind still shine, untouched by the rise and fall of kings And you, breathing softly now, are part of that same endless song, not by conquering, not by ruling, but simply by being. May your dreams be lighter than thrones of stone. May your hopes be brighter than walls built against fear. And may you, unlike the emperor, find peace not in monuments or armies, but in the quiet, unbreakable strength of a heart, unafraid to live fully and gently. Rest easy, traveler through ancient empires. The ghosts of broken dreams cannot follow you here. Only the lessons remain, whispered softly, like a lullaby carried on the oldest winds. Sleep now. The world you walk tomorrow will not be carved in stone, but in the kindness of your steps. And that, not crowns, not palaces, not immortality, is the true measure of greatness. Long after Huang closed his eyes to the world, his empire kept breathing without him. The roads he had built still carried merchants and messengers across the vast stretches of land. The walls he ordered to rise still stood against the biting winds. The fields he had claimed still grew golden beneath the changing skies. But the heart of the empire, the force that had pulled it together through sheer will, was gone. And with it, the illusion of permanence he had fought so desperately to create. Rebellions spread like wildfires across the provinces. The peasants, once beaten into submission, now raised their heads and their voices. The generals, once loyal, now weighed their own ambitions against the promises of a crumbling throne. The dynasty Huang had founded, the dynasty that had once seemed destined to last forever, withered in barely a few years. The dream of eternal rule faded faster than anyone could have imagined. But the tomb remained. Beneath layers of earth and secrecy, it waited, untouched by the storms raging above, guarded by thousands of silent warriors, frozen in perfect formation, standing watch over a king who had feared the future more than he had embraced it. No living hands disturbed the tomb for centuries. It slumbered in the soil, a hidden city of sorrow and ambition, forgotten even as new dynasties rose and fell. And when at last, thousands of years later, farmers stumbled upon fragments of those terracotta soldiers, the world remembered Huang once more. They marveled at the scale of his vision. They gasped at the power he had once wielded. They mourned, perhaps quietly, the loneliness that had built such a place. Because in the end, the terracotta army is not a monument to victory. It is a monument to fear. A monument to a man who conquered the world around him, but could never conquer the emptiness within. Each soldier, carved with painstaking care, carries not just the weight of military might, but the unspoken truth that no number of armies can shield a soul from its own shadows. Huang tried to escape death. He tried to bind time itself beneath his rule, but the world turned without him. The rivers flowed onward, the forests grew thicker, the stars spun silently above, uncaring, unchanged, and perhaps somewhere, deep within the soil, the emperor's spirit finally found the peace he could never grasp in life. Tonight, as you listen, as your breathing slows, as your thoughts drift like leaves on a gentle river, remember this: life is not meant to be conquered. It is meant to be lived, not in fear of endings, but in wonder at the moments we are given. Power fades, Gold tarnishes, walls crumble, even the grandest empires return to dust. But kindness endures, gentleness endures, love, simple, stubborn, quiet, endures longer than any kingdom. Qinshi, Huang chased immortality through armies and monuments and forbidden sciences. But a true immortality lies not in being remembered with awe, but in being remembered with tenderness, not in towering statues, but in the soft echoes of lives, touched gently. And that kind of immortality, the only kind that truly matters, is already within your reach, with every kindness offered, with every hand held, with every moment chosen, not from fear, but from love. The first emperor sleeps now beneath his mighty tomb. The stars he feared to leave behind still whisper overhead, patient and forgiving. And you are free to walk the earth with lighter steps, to build not with stone and fear, but with dreams and courage. Let the emperor's story be a gentle guide, not a warning to flee greatness, but a reminder to seek it in the places he never thought to look, in laughter shared under open skies, in promises kept with open hearts, in the simple, radiant act of living fully, bravely, and kindly. Rest now, traveler of ancient roads. Let the dust of old empires settle behind you. Let the stars cradle you in their ancient arms. You are stronger than fear. You are greater than crowns. And you are more enduring than any wall built against time. Sleep deeply. The world, with all its beauty and sorrow, waits for you to wake and build something new, something no king could ever command, something no emperor could ever destroy. A life touched by kindness, a world lit by hope, and that is a legacy more lasting than stone, more powerful than armies, more eternal than dreams of endless rule. There, beneath layers of earth and centuries of silence, Emperor Qin Shi Huang remains, not as he dreamed, immortal, ruling a land of eternal obedience, but as a memory wrapped in soil and stone. His grand tomb, once crafted to protect him from the unknown, has become a quiet monument to the very thing he feared most. Not death, but being forgotten, being powerless to shape what came after him. Yet even now, he is not forgotten. The footsteps of travelers echo through museums and fields once untouched, gazing at the endless rows of terracotta soldiers who stand not in triumph, but in stillness, each face carved with a care he denied to the living, each figure a reminder that even in death, his grip on the world was desperate, unyielding, and tragically human. Qin Shi Huang wanted to hold the river of time in his hands, but time, patient and unstoppable, flowed around him, over him, through him, wearing down even the mightiest dreams. His empire was reshaped, his laws revised, his walls weathered, his roads overgrown, but something of him endures, not the fear, not the cruelty, but the lessons, quiet, steady, more enduring than any monument. The lesson that power is not immortality, the lesson that fear does not preserve life, it only shortens its light. The lesson that no matter how high we build our walls, no matter how fiercely we command the world to obey, we are all carried forward by the same endless tide. And so, Qin Shi Huang remains, not as a god, not as a tyrant, but as a whisper folded into the great story of humanity, a reminder to live with open hands, not clenched fists, to build bridges, not tombs, to plant seeds that will grow in gardens we may never walk ourselves. Tonight, as you drift gently toward sleep, think not of the stone armies standing vigil in the dark. Think, instead of the river still singing beyond the tomb's cold gates, the winds still moving freely across the fields, the stars still spinning their ancient songs above, a world no emperor could ever cage. Let your heart be lighter than crowns, heavy with fear. Let your dreams be wider than empires drawn on crumbling maps. The first emperor chased a forever he could never find. But you are free to find something greater, joy in a single sunrise, peace in a single breath, love in a single life, lived fully, bravely, kindly. You do not need terracotta armies to protect you. You do not need rivers of mercury to guide your soul. You need only the small, steady compass within you, the quiet voice that says, live well, love fiercely, leave kindness behind like footprints in the sand. The ancient world has fallen silent now. The battles have ended. The kings have gone to dust. Only the lessons remain, carried forward by those wise enough to listen. You are one of them. Sleep peacefully, traveler. You have wandered through broken kingdoms, stood beneath crumbling thrones, listened to the last cries of fallen empires. Now it is time to rest, to let the stories of the past settle into soft memories, like distant stars fading into the bright promise of morning. You carry their lessons, but not their burdens. You honor their truths, but you are not bound by their fears. You are free, free to live with a heart open to wonder, free to build a life stitched not by conquest, but by compassion, free to walk forward where even the greatest kings could not. Sleep deeply now. The earth hums gently beneath you. The stars watch silently above, and tomorrow waits, filled with dreams not even emperors could imagine. Dream sweetly, dream bravely, and know that your light, soft and stubborn and bright, is more enduring than any wall, any tomb, any crown. It is the only true immortality, and it is yours.